Wizards of the Coast has made a habit of disappointing their fans lately, but $60 for a book? With the events of the past year, an increase in price for D&D books should come as no surprise. After all, Wizards of the Coast has done much worse with the blatant Magic the Gathering cash grabs, the OGL debacle, and even sending Pinkerton thugs to a YouTuber's house. Nobody's home! And much of this on the heels of the apparent comments made by Hasbro executives stating that D&D is an undermonetized intellectual property. Now that they've confessed the minimal profits of the D&D movie, they might be considering other ways to squeeze the most juice out of this community. So that's why they're raising book prices to $60, right? Well, maybe not. Wizards of the Coast themselves cite shipping and printing prices as the reason for the increase, which seems to be in line with other American companies that are now ironically posting record profits. Seriously, have any of you tried to buy eggs lately? I mean, I pretty much live on frozen pizzas, but I've heard. All this has culminated in some interesting takes online by other individuals that I'll keep nameless for the sake of not starting any drama. What I will say is that these personalities have made a habit of jumping to conclusions about recent news in the TTRPG space in a weirdly alarmist fashion. And I can't much blame them because Wizards of the Coast is pretty easy to hate right now. So let's start by having a look at what was said in reaction to this price increase, which was posted on Twitter, the #1 source of factual information on the internet. Why are both of these $60? One is a AAA title video game from a world-renowned developer, and the other is a rulebook that largely relies on the creativity of players and theater of the mind. Surely it takes more work to make a video game than to write the rules of D&D, right? Is WOTC being greedy here? Well, let's consider some other $60 items and add them to this comparison. You might spend $60 on a bucket of whey protein, as one user cites on Twitter. You might pay $60 per month for the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite, and I regularly pay upwards of $60 for a single piece of character art for use in our live stream campaigns. All of these items are very different. They involve different services, different scopes of work, different use cases, and different user bases. But it is important to point out here that I'm not an economist. I took one economics class in college, and I don't remember doing particularly well in it. But I do know at the very least that Elden Ring has sold over 20 million copies in about a year, whereas the 5e Player's Handbook had sold something below 1 million copies in its first 3 years. Admittedly, the exact numbers are hard to find, but these estimates mean that Elden Ring has done well over 40 times the volume of the most important book of any D&D collection when compared side by side. So presumably, if the developers of Elden Ring make even $1 per game sale, Wizards of the Coast need to make at least $40 per book sale to clear roughly the same profit. But do they even make that much? Well, some references I've found suggest that printing a book in the measurements and number of pages consistent with a publication in the TTRPG industry would cost something like $30 per copy. However, with their enormous print order, I'm sure the cost would be as low as $20 per book for Wizards of the Coast. So it would appear that after raising their price to $60 per book, WOTC would be taking away about as much as $40. But there are some important observations to point out here. First, video game publishers are certainly making more than $1 per sale of their games. Some estimates I've found suggest as much as about $15 profit per game sold. So in total, making 1/15 of what a AAA video game does isn't much to write home about, even if it does take about 10 times the number of employees to make Elden Ring as it does for WOTC to publish D&D. Second, the video game industry itself is hardly a model to measure success by. Jobs in this industry are known to be grueling in terms of the number of work hours required, as well as the low pay compared to other jobs in similar lines of work. Finally, it's worth noting that this $60 price tag is not just getting you a physical copy of the book. In a fairly surprising move last year, WOTC announced that future releases would include digital copies on D&D Beyond and full automated support for their digital character sheet tools, something that some other TTRPG publishers charge a premium for. So let's sum it all up. Why are both of these $60? Well, it's because they're both worth $60. Listen, I'm not here to defend Wizards of the Coast, believe me. But if you go looking for problems with your eyes closed, you're going to find problems. Factoring in additional observations like the fact that inflation alone would see a $50 book in 2017 well worth over $60 now, and even drawing parallels between this and the current writer's strike in the film industry that has long underpaid writers, it becomes obvious that this is a terrible take. As some other users point out on Twitter, D&D sets the bar more or less for the prices of published TTRPG material from other third parties as well. So whether or not additional revenue makes it to their writers, we may also want to consider how keeping these prices down could hurt writers in this space. Really, the more you look at this comparison, the worse things tend to appear. Many have even drawn attention to the fact that video games themselves need to raise their prices as well, since they've largely been valued at $60 for well over a decade now. Some of the original supporters of this comparison are even charging as much as $30 for their own TTRPG books that do not come with a physical book copy. And seeing as it would cost them about $20 to $30 to print that physical book, this all becomes a pot calling the kettle black situation. Again, I won't call anyone out by name here, and I fervently believe that you should still support these third-party publishers and creators. That's what it's all about in this TTRPG space, and I think that's why they're so passionate about holding WOTC accountable. So by all means, let's keep Wizards of the Coast on the straight and narrow, but let's do it the right way with good research and factual information. Now go out there and be chaotic good, not chaotic evil.